I'm just going to try to be a little bit more broad than in my previous presentation today. I'm calling it How Smart Growth Strangles Housing Affordability. I always like to start with this slide of Indonesia and Australia. I've got a slide I showed last year of Rio de Janeiro. You know, the fact is that what distinguishes third world economies from first world economies is the extent of poverty. You see here in Jakarta this high-rise luxury apartment building, and you see the poor people who live off by here. The difference between Australia or America and Indonesia is we have a whole lot fewer of our people are poor, and I won't go into that. That's interesting. Well, it's they actually do pretty well on zoning. They got a deregulated approach where they have very strong regulations that no one enforces. Anyway, I'm probably going to run through this fairly quickly because I put this together very quickly this morning. But in any event, William Lewis in a book, William Lewis was the founder of the McKinsey Global Institute. He did a book on the competitiveness, and they did studies of the competitiveness of various economies around the world in the 1990s, and they basically said the real growing economies like the US economy, and at that point the Australian economy was one of them, were the ones that are particularly competitive, and he saw land use regulation, liberal land use regimes, as being very important to that process. Now, you know, we all hear about urban sprawl. We should recognize that that is, if urban sprawl were a theological term, which of course it is, we would call it sin. The fact is, urban sprawl is nothing more than suburbanization. And when you go to Australia, the interesting thing to me is to hear the Australian urban planners talk about how things are in America. To hear them talk about American suburbs, this is what you would think that American suburbs look like, you know, the shanty towns of Jakarta or wherever. You wouldn't believe the myths that go around that nation with respect to developments being built in the U.S. suburbs without services. I have never seen a development in a U.S. suburb without services. The unplanned suburbs of America, granted, the suburbs of Australia look very nice, but they don't look any nicer than our suburbs. So it's amazing that people there could think about this country that's 30% more affluent being poorer. But in any event, some quick thoughts just about suburbanization. Virtually all development in the first world for the last 40 years has been in urban areas, has been suburban. In Europe, as a matter of fact, 115% of urban growth has been suburban, not urban, with the central cities losing. I always like to show my favorite picture of the suburbs of Paris. More of Paris looks like this than looks like what you would expect it to look like. Or the suburbs of Tokyo. Tokyo is surrounded by huge single-family detached suburbs that look, now that's some of the newer stuff, they don't all look that good. You know, we always hear about this thought that, you know, we're running out of farmland. Well, you know, we've taken out of production in this country in 50 years an amount of land equal to Oklahoma and Texas because of improved productivity. There's no farmland problem. We hear that sprawl and suburbanization increases traffic congestion. Baloney. Look at the data the anti-suburban people put out on their own. You find out that that's not true. And in fact, if you look at a scatter diagram of the average travel delay and congestion of the major U.S. urban areas in the TTI data, you find a very interesting curve basically showing a strong relationship between density and traffic congestion. You can see the outlier there is Atlanta, which, while being a world leader in housing affordability and the fastest growing large urban area in the first world, also has one of the worst road programs. They've historically had the view here that the answer to every road problem is the addition of a lane to I-285, which just doesn't work. We hear that sprawl and suburbanization increases traffic congestion. I lived in LA 20 years. I didn't even know those mountains existed, but many times now you can see those mountains. The fact is, air pollution has gotten much better, and air pollution is reduced as we increase the speed of travel. We hear that suburbanization and urban sprawl increases travel times. Not so. This is the New York metropolitan area, the counties of the New York metropolitan area. This is by work location, and what you find is that in the outer suburbs, which contain 33% of the jobs of the New York City metropolitan region, are the shortest travel times. The inner suburbs, where you get this wonderful centers concept that the smart growthers love so much, have the longest travel times. We hear that we need to balance jobs and housing. We'll tell the British that. They built all sorts of new towns after the war, intended to be places where there would be a balance between jobs and housing, where people would work in their new town. Yet what you see here is out of the 2001 census, this is Welwyn, one of the 10 or 12 new towns built around London. The average commute distance of a Welwyn resident is more than double the diameter of the new town, and those kind of data can be shown for any new town in the UK. You can look at Hong Kong, the most dense urban area in the world, at least in the first world, and you find the average work trip distance is 5 miles. You would think with those kinds of densities you could find a job on your apartment building floor. So the whole idea of the jobs housing balance doesn't make any sense. I showed that slide before. Now, a few thoughts about how smart growth destroys housing affordability. You saw that slide before, which is just the resume of the over 1 million markets and their median multiples. That is median household, median house price divided by median household income. Now, just another slide. This is where I walk here every day, very close to my house. Now, this is a little bit more expensive than the housing in Atlanta that I showed you earlier, but these are pretty good sized houses, 2,500 square foot houses. I say house and land just so people understand it's not just the house itself, from $180,000. Not bad prices. Median house price in St. Louis is about $130. It's about $150 in Houston, $160 in Dallas, Fort Worth, $175 in Atlanta. And you go around most of the United States and most of Canada, and you're going to find prices in this range. Now, the interesting thing, though, however, and in our annual study, which I do with Hugh Pavletich out of Christchurch, New Zealand, we do this median multiple, and we actually rate the urban areas. The 3 and below we call affordable, moderately unaffordable is 3-1 to 4, seriously unaffordable is 4-1 to 5, and severely unaffordable is 5-1 plus. Now, there's nothing magic about these things, except the press just loves to for you to put labels on these numbers, and so it's been very successful. But if you take that classification and you go back in the United States, this is the number of markets out of about 62, I think it was, last year. If you go back to 1995, look at how different it was. Most markets were under 3. So this is a problem that is absolutely unprecedented. We saw that before. There is the research. There is research out of produced by Kate Barker for the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, who will soon be out of office, in which she basically showed that over the last 30 years, the average house prices in the UK have gone up each year a percentage point more than the average house prices in the EU, and that's pretty impressive when you consider that the EU has done almost, generally, EU nations have not liberalized their economies at all, and the UK has. But the problem of housing affordability as it exists in the UK is due to land use restrictions, which is what she says. Various reports in the United States, including a report by Ed Glazer, basically say the difference between the unaffordable and affordable housing markets in the United States have to do with land use regulation. A similar report by Wachovia Bank. These are some of the kinds of strategies that cause the problem. The smart growth strategies of urban growth boundaries, green belts, infill mandates, costly infrastructure fee. That's it for Australia's slow release of land. Next time I give the presentation, I'm going to certainly include the inclusionary zoning, because I was not aware of how much that was a problem. A lot of planners don't understand this planning delay thing. You know, you buy a piece of land and you start making the applications to build on it, and you got to pay interest on it all that time. And of course, the planners, that's not real money to them. And to give you an idea how bad it's gotten in Australia, they actually had a 7-year moratorium on new land releases in Sydney. So you wonder why it is that they had the problem. They are now hoping to have the first houses complete in 2008 on the last land release that was announced, which is in 2001. So 7 years from the announcement to the building of the house. And the basic problem is very clear. Here's a schematic based upon the work that Cascade has done in Portland, where they basically said, okay, let's look at what happens at the point the urban growth boundary stops, and then you're into agricultural land. You get this big drop in land price right there. So adjacent land tends to be 10 times as expensive if you can develop on it than land that you can't develop on. And there are a couple of documented cases in the United Kingdom of 500 times. You get the planned unit development kind of an approach. And I don't know how much this is happening here, but all over Australia, not only is there a problem that there's not land being made available to develop, but they're also doing these things of approving only developments that they call master planning, you know, with signature walls, nice lakes, and all of that kind of thing. And they're just marvelous neighborhoods, except first home buyers couldn't possibly afford these. And I've suggested when I was in Australia that, you know, at the same time, why don't we also outlaw these little ugly cars like this, you know? And we ought to basically require that everybody have a nice big, you know, a big sedan that looks like a, you know, a Mercury or a Pontiac or something like that. And that's essentially what we're doing. This is a marvelous quotation from someone that's famous in the industry who I just found this morning on the internet doing some research on Los Angeles, Bill Fulton, who's a Ventura City councilman and very much involved in the politics of Ventura County that Sam has talked about. He says, don't let opportunistic developers shift the focus to land elsewhere that they might happen to own. And that says it all. Because here are some of the problems we get into with all this. They want contiguous serial development. They want the next lot to be developed, to be the lot that's next to the last lot that was developed. Or they may tell you this third point, that they'll often say, I've seen the reports in San Diego where they claim to have 20 years of land supply. Yeah, 20 years of land supply. And if you live inside that 20 years of land supply, all of a sudden your price for land is much higher than it would have been if you didn't know you were in that 20 years of land supply. So anytime they tell you, I mean, if they got 1,000 years of land supply, I think you're safe. But the basic point is that this whole idea, it would be as if we lined up the kids when it's time to select a mate to live with the rest of your life, and you go to the PE class and you line up the boys here and you line up the girls here, and they just take the next one that comes in line. Well, that's how the planners think the market should work, and of course the net result of all that is huge increases. They want to ban leapfrog development. I'm a great fan of leapfrog development. Leapfrog development is what made housing affordability possible in this country, because when the developer went to this piece of property that's contiguous to the development and the farmer wanted too much money, the developer went 5 miles further out, bought the property for less, and then later other developers filled in. The problem with urban planners is they tend to think you know, that the city's always got to look like a living room that nobody has ever been in and is just dusted from time to time. Well, cities are organisms and they change all the time. I've given you that before. One of the real problems with what we're dealing with now is that we still have major segments of our society that don't have huge home ownership rates. The white non-Hispanic rate in this country of home ownership is about 75%. African American and Hispanic are about 47%. And these things that we're doing in places like Portland and California and Denver and the northeast of the United States with the downzoning and all that are basically cutting into these rates and are going to make it impossible for black and Hispanic home ownership rates to ever converge on whites. We should have everybody who wants to be able to own their own home to be able to do it, and we're raising the bar at this point, and we're going to be a less fair society in the future because of it. I've already shown you that one before. I mentioned very briefly the San Diego situation this morning, but in the previous presentation. But San Diego local, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Authority organization in San Diego, says that they're going to gain 1 million people over the next 30 years. They need to look at current trends. The Census Bureau says that for the first time in a long time, San Diego County actually lost population last year, including births and deaths and international immigration. And of course, there is the fact that internal migration losses have been very strong in San Diego over the last few years. Anyway, that's just the same old advertisement. Do I have to fill up the time, or am I permitted to stop?